Grimgor Ironhide. I believe he's one of the leaders of the Greenskin faction in Warhammer 3, and I know that some of you guys have been really looking forward to this one. So let's see what Pancreas has to say about him. But of course, before we do, go and sub to Pancreas. He makes awesome lore videos.
Some of my favorite characters in fiction are those that are less character and more force of nature. Like, yeah, making a nuanced and interesting person is the best thing you can hope for when it comes to characterizing someone. But failing that, just making that character something that everyone else is forced to react and plan around can be almost as good, and potentially a lot more fun. It's how I imagine Darth Vader looks like from the perspective of someone who never knew him as Anakin Skywalker. Like in Fallen Order or Rogue One. He's not a person, he's Darth Vader. He's a
Dude. Oh, well, I probably shouldn't be talking about that in case of spoilers, but, Rogue One was a great movie. Oh, we should really do some Star Wars lore at some point. But I get what he's saying. Sometimes you just want that character that goes all out and just does all these absolutely crazy things because, you know, it's cool. Of course, there's a time for the more nuanced characterization of people, but having a little mix of both is great in a story.
monster that's going to rip you to pieces and running away is the best thing you can possibly hope for. There's little in the way indicating there's a human being under that armor, just something that'll rip you apart without even noticing. And fulfilling that fun role in Warhammer Fantasy, we have Grimgor Ironhide. Malekith might be a better choice for Warhammer Fantasy Vader overall, but in terms of sheer fear factor, I'd give it to good old Grimgor. Because Grimgor Ironhide is to the average man, dwarf, or elf what Darth Vader was to those rebels in the hallway. Your death was set in stone the moment you crossed paths with him. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take for him to reach you. Let me tell you his story and all its violent glory. But before I start Grimgor's lore proper, I just want to say that I think he's a bit of a pioneer in his own way. He would pick a trail and follow it no matter how long or hard the journey would be. There's something fun about that concept that really absorbs me. And if it's as interesting to you as it is to me, I've got just the thing for you.
Sponsor?
The game The Oregon Trail, the sponsor of this video. No,
I think I played this a long time ago on my phone. Looks very different here, though.
I believe in the name of honesty, it's best to tell you my genuine opinion about this game. I can't stop playing it. When I first downloaded it, I figured, hey, I'll check it out for a bit and see how it goes. Then 5.5 hours went by and I realized I hadn't eaten dinner. Finding supplies on the Oregon Trail, be it hunting or going through broken down wagons for repair parts, all in the name of reaching the end, it's the exact sort of gameplay loop that hits everything I want. And as a fan of history, it's a portion of US history that isn't often looked at beyond a mention of
honestly, true. But for me, at the moment, I kind of feel the same way when I'm playing Total War Warhammer. Like, it's just such an addicting game, just next turn and next turn, and just one more turn, you know. But I get the idea. Back when I played this game, it looks a lot different now, as I said. It was very addicting, too.
U.S. citizens went east, so it's great to see a representation of what the journey might have been like. Sometimes you make it through a region with zero issues, sometimes every single possible thing goes wrong, and all of your settlers simultaneously have diseases you've never heard of in your life. I assure you, I'm speaking from experience. And there's some big things coming to the trail this month. The game's already available on PC, Switch, and Xbox platforms, but on February 9th, it's coming out for both PS4 and PS5 as a cross-platform bundle with a limited-time 33% discount. It'll be available from the 9th to the 25th for PS Plus users only. But there's still more to come because the Cowboys and Critters DLC is also releasing. It's available on all platforms already and will be available day one with the game on PlayStation. New journeys, characters, locations, and more are all coming, all for the low price of $5. You can even find cryptids if you're lucky, and I can promise you this is entirely worth it. So what are you holding out for, pioneer in waiting? Go to my link in the description and check out the Oregon Trail today. It's that magical sort of game where you can play a run for as long or as little as you want and still enjoy your time spent. Play the Oregon Trail today, because catching dysentery has never been this fun. Now then, let's get mean and green. The tale of Grimgor Ironhide begins when one day the Chaos Dwarfs had a brilliant idea. Their orc slaves were strong, yes, but they were still—
Oh, that's right. I read in a comment once that apparently some greenskins escaped because the Chaos Dwarves made them too strong because they wanted to improve their working capability. And that's why, you know, some of them are more scarier than others.
orcs. They were stupid, needlessly violent, and had a habit of beating their fellow slaves to death at a moment's notice. And obviously that's just terrible, for their profit margins. They weren't being nearly as efficient as they could be, so the Chaos Dwarfs decided they just needed to make a better orc. They went to work with the foulest of magics and succeeded. They had made the Black Orcs. And overall, it was quite unfortunate for the Chaos Dwarfs that they succeeded in making bigger, stronger, smarter orcs. Because you see, they made bigger, stronger, smarter orcs. Apparently the thought of this going poorly never occurred, but to be fair, they don't have Jurassic Park to watch in Warhammer. It wasn't an immediate rebellion, but it came soon enough, and when it did, Grimgor Ironhide was at the front of it, taking down his captors and escaping alongside some other Black Orc slaves. Of course, very few in-universe actually know this backstory for him. As far as most people know, he just kinda showed up in the Badlands one day with his bodyguard of fellow Black Orcs, the Immortals. Naturally, he immediately took...
So that's his faction name. The names for the orcs and whatnot are kind of funny. But you also have to imagine that, like, he beat his way out of whatever workplace he was kept in without, like, any good equipment versus the Chaos Dwarves, who have some of the most advanced equipment, along with the dwarves.
Charge of wherever he went, because for orcs, biggest is boss, and no one was bigger than Grimgor was. And even if they were, he'd still slaughter them. Eventually, though, he ran out of other orcs to butcher, partially because most of the other orcs wanted to join his tribe and see what this guy was all about, mostly because he was an absolutely terrifying monster to behold. Fun little fact about him: if you went a day without a fight, he'd start causing fights amongst his own tribe out of boredom. If he went 2 days without a fight, most orcs and every goblin that went near him got slaughtered. He's never gone more than 2 days without a fight, because all the greenskins under his command are terrified of that ever happening. Entire campaigns have been organized out of fear of what Grimgor will do if he doesn't have anything to fight in front of him. To get back on track though, after he ran out of orcs to fight, he decided that he'd go see what those dwarf slayers were all about. After all, a death cult seeking redemption and glorious battle seems like the perfect thing to test his axe against. So he goes to Karakadrin, the home of the slayers, and after a few battles it shuts its doors and tells them to piss off. And let's just focus on that for a second. The dwarves who are religiously motivated to die in battle refuse to fight Grimgor anymore because of how brutal he was. And dwarf slayers generally aren't the type to be truly afraid of their deaths. They seek it out with glee, and for most of them it's at best a disappointment when they survive a battle. Yeah.
The fact that they think like that and they don't even want to fight Grimgor says something. Like, how exactly does Grimgor fight for these guys to, like, be like, nope? I'd rather die someplace else.
It's just how monstrous Grimgor was, and his journey was just beginning. Rather pissed off about this development, but already this far north in the Warhammer world, Grimgor marched his army right off to Kislev. He heard the humans around here spent all their free time fighting chaos, and they'd surely put up a good fight. And in all fairness to the Slavic soup of cultures that the Kislevites are, they were the best fight he had yet. And also the best rations Grimgor had yet, because best fight against Grimgor just means he lasts 5 seconds instead of 1 against him. Much like everyone who invades Russia, however, Grimgor didn't prepare for the winter. Although to give him some credit, winter in this case meant Tsarina Katerin kept freezing his entire army with a single massive blizzard. It's a bit of a cheap shot and not something you can really prepare for, though anyone who blames her for doing said cheap shot is an idiot. I wouldn't want to fight Grimgor directly either. Every time he left, the storm she conjured would stop, and when he'd come back with more orcs, she'd just go whatever and start it up again. Though it took some time, and God only knows how many orc lives, he finally got the hint and went back to the World's Edge Mountains, gathering more orcs and hoping that whatever enemy he found next wouldn't just toggle downfall on him over and over again. Sure enough, he found a bunch of night goblins while he was dicking around in the lower levels of some conquered dwarf hold. Chasing after them, he found more tunnels that went deeper and deeper, and having nothing better to do, he went right in them. Want to take a guess what he found down there? More night goblins. And Skaven. A lot of Skaven. You might think that the Skaven would be a poor fight for Grimgor, being cowardly and weak and all that. And in a 1v1 case, you'd be right. But is anyone familiar with the rat's nose? You never 1v1 a Skaven. You 1v100 those furry bastards.
Yeah. There's never just one rat. Just always be aware of that. Like, even in Warhammer 3, like, if there's an army somewhere, there's probably a second and a third army somewhere close by as well. These guys multiply like, well, rats.
and Grimgor was finally in green, violent heaven. He never ran out of things to kill, and when the rats brought out the big guns like rat ogres or rattling guns, things were actually exciting. And these were the best rations he'd ever had. It's worth mentioning that he was entering Hell Pit, the place where the Skaven make things like Hell Pit abominations, mutant rat ogres, and other things that would make any sane being peace right the hell out. And sure enough, at one point, the rest of his army retreated to upper levels, and this was Grimgor's time to shine. He found a narrow tunnel, waited for Throt the Unclean to send his best creations, and started swinging, and swinging, and swinging, and swinging, until nothing was left, and he had done what no one else before him had ever done, breached into a Skaven city. Such a monumental accomplishment should have been down in the history books, but in true orc fashion, Grimgor probably didn't know what he had done, and definitely didn't give a shit. All he cared about was that all the fun things were dead, and he was bored, so he left. Throt actually planned to go take care of Grimgor himself, which would have resulted in an early grave, but when he got there with his creations, the green monster that was butchering his stuff was gone. Naturally, he took his frustration in not being able to kill Grimgor out on the Empire, because the Skaven love to make themselves feel better by hurting others. After this, his story turns into that of your average D&D party. He just started wandering the lands killing things. I guess that's what he had always been doing, but now it comes across as even less goal-oriented than before. For instance, he just kind of decided he was going to go to the Chaos Dwarf lands and started causing them all sorts of problems. At one point, he declared war on the ogres in the Mountains of Morn in their own lands, which, as you can see from the Total War trailer in the background right now, not even the Chaos Gods could successfully do that. He even found a massive horde of Chaos followers who were on their way to Kislev since they heard that Grimgor had done such a fine job of weakening it. Now, dear viewer and/or listener, how do you think that went for the Chaos Horde? Did you guess they were slaughtered en masse? If you did, pat yourself on the back, because that's what happened. He killed so many.
It wasn't hard to guess, that's for sure. But you just gotta admire it, right? Like, they're just here for a good fight. Whether it's the good side or chaos, like, who cares? We just want to fight. And sometimes it goes our way, other times not so much, but, you know, at least somebody gets a good fight out of it.
Many of them, they thought he was a demon prince that only existed to slaughter chaos. And you know what? That brings me such joy to hear that the closest thing to keeping Malal canon was the living brick named Grimgor Ironhide. But despite even this, he was pretty bored. Everything he fought was boring him, because everything he fought had a life expectancy of however long it took Grimgor to get into melee with him.
Actually, you mentioned Malal? Wasn't that the name of, the 5th Chaos God? That was kind of meant to be like the Chaos God that hunted the other Chaos Gods, but then, for copyright reasons or whatever, they never introduced him into the universe. I could be misremembering this since it has been a while since we talked about this, or like it was mentioned in a video. But I believe that's what Pancreas was referring to.
It was like he was Warhammer Fantasy's Saitama. There was nothing fun left to fight, nothing fun left to do. Everything went down in one quick swing of Gitsnick. Where's the fun to be had? Now with that though, we come to a bit of a divergence in Grimgor's story. Because on the one hand, we have the end times, but on the other hand, we have Storm of Chaos. And while non-canon and a proper shitshow all on its own, Grimgor Ironhide ends up becoming the highlight of it in the funniest way possible. For those unfamiliar with it, Storm of Chaos was when GW wanted the end times, but allowed fantasy players to submit battle reports to dictate how the campaign went. In this timeline, Grimgor fought against the Chaos Lord Crom the Conqueror, some Chaos Undivided Lord I don't really care to talk about much except for his relevance here. His and Grimgor's army fought, and they both butchered the other guy's A-team bodyguards, so they fought each other to a standstill. Unfortunately, Grimgor's army wasn't up to snuff, so it got routed. Grimgor, and I want to make this very clear, did not retreat from the battle. He was pissed at his army for retreating, so he ran after them to make them all come back to the fight. Crom, for his part, went to reinforce Arcan's army. Pretty happy he got to fight someone like Grimgor, but overall just kind of nonplussed about the whole thing. As Grimgor finally got his army back together, he heard about this chaos loser who was even tougher and stronger than Crom. He was excited. It was time for another fight. In the real world, Games Workshop had realized that Chaos was losing every battle it fought, and despite the fact they ignored the rules and kept moving Chaos up, it continued to lose and lose and lose some more. Because they allowed the fanbase to participate, this opened the doors for their special faction to actually fail. And fail it did. In desperation, GW just asked people to vote on who they wanted to win. Surely the fans of the franchise were going to vote for the army that wanted to destroy the franchise. They did not. They pick the greenskins.
Yo,
Grimgor showed up
let's
as Arcan
go.
was killing Sigmar's reincarnation and giving his generic evil bad guy speech, and kicked him square in the balls before declaring he was the best and wandering off to make a bigger army. All the while, his current ones slaughtered the forces of chaos around them, and Karl Franz finally showed up to clean up whatever the fuck was going on in front of him.
Okay, you know what? Maybe this is a better ending. The best ending that they could possibly have gotten. Just let the greenskins win the fight. They don't even care about, like, ruling the world. They just want a good fight. Beating up chaos. Like, why would anybody want chaos to win? Because if chaos does win, then everything just ends. It's like, what's the fun in that? But I guess GW really does love chaos. They are just so much more love than all the other factions. And, I mean, this is not to knock down any Chaos players out there. I myself am quite interested in trying out some of the Chaos factions. However, when it comes to the story itself, I mean, if the bad guy wins, they can win once. That's kind of the rule there, right? If they ultimately win, then, like, what's even the point of the story? Unless if you want to have a situation where, like, maybe the bad guy tries to live on and then maybe learns to regret their decision later. I don't know. I'm sure that there's a series out there that goes along with that kind of, plot in mind.
I imagine he was mostly just confused seeing the greatest threat to his people on the ground and this massive orc running around hollering like a chimp. Also, fun fact, it took longer for Karl Franz to reach Middenheim from Altdorf than it did for Archaon to reach it from Kislev. Plot armor.
What?
It works wonders. Games Workshop swiftly declared everything here non-canon and swept it under the rug. Now it's time for the end times. Urzag the Great Green Prophet had a revelation. 2 orc gods mean 2 orc champions of the gods. For Mork we have Skarsnik, and he's not relevant to this video, so that's his lot for now. The other is who else but Grimgor for Gork. As for what he did, Grimgor is perhaps the only non-chaos character to get some serious wins under his belt. Aside from maybe Nagash, but after his book he stopped getting those wins. After being told he was one of the 2 greenskins who would unite them all into one big wah, Grimgor immediately marched east towards Cathay. Along the way, he encountered what was apparently a pretty large orc empire before killing the guy in charge, and it was now part of Grimgor's orc empire. Although in saying that, he wasn't building much of an empire, because everyone he conquered he took with him. The hobgoblins that reside in much of the lands between Cathay and the Old World were also brutalized and added to his horde. When he finally arrives at his destination, with a much bigger army, he just adds to the mess that Cathay had become by that point. The Chaos Dwarfs had taken the Great Bastion alongside some Skaven and miscellaneous Chaos tribes, and were getting ready to invade the rest of Cathay when Grimgor finally showed up. At long last, here he was, ready to take revenge against the Chaos Dwarfs for what they did to him all those years ago. And by God, did he get revenge. Millions of greenskins came crashing down as Grimgor engaged the leaders of the Chaos Dwarfs in head combat. The battle lasted for hours, but I'm sure you never doubted the end result. Grimgor and his horde killed them to the last, and Gork and Mork were dominant over the Chaos Gods in the east. With that, however, it was time for Grimgor to head back. The best fights weren't to be found in Cathay, but back in the Empire. Of course, before that, he had to make a few pit stops, and somehow in all of this mess, he became the incarnate of beast magic. Phenomenal planning as always, Techless. I'm sure that was entirely on purpose. He also at one point burned down Nippon's dragon fleets, but who cares? Nippon's lore starts and ends with, they trained Clan Eshin. GW didn't care about their lore, so I won't pretend to either. His first...
What? I guess they just kind of like threw them in there just to have them there, but like, yeah, I've never heard anybody even mention Nippon or like any more lore to them than the fact that, yeah, they trained Clan Ishin. Like, come on now. I feel like it'd be super popular, but you know, that's just me.
of the 2 major pit stops was visiting the lands of the ogres. The volcanoes in the mountains of Mournrange had decided to start erupting, as if the very planet itself had realized Games Workshop was destroying the setting and it might as well help them out. So
that's as good a reason as any. Probably better than the explanation that GW came up with for that one.
The ogres were in a bit of a rough state, and good old Greasus, my BMI as registered on the Richter scale Goldtooth, decided he'd be the king of all the ogres ever. Grimgor, wanting more ogres in his army than the already impressive amount he had, took issue with this. Greasus in turn took issue with Grimgor, and the 2 of them went to blows. Greasus actually nearly managed to take him down, but Grimgor was destined for better things to do than die to the Warhammer world's first Walmart shopper and killed Greasus. I would have said bigger and better things to do, but there's not really much in existence bigger than Greasus. After that, vengeance was finally had by Grimgor, for he marched straight into the homeland of the Chaos Dwarfs and ripped their lands apart. There really isn't much to say about it, since the Chaos Dwarfs by 8th edition were already tertiary parts of the lore at best. And honestly, their lore in the end times pretty much just amounts to conquered parts of Cathay and were murdered by Grimgor. So with that, the march to the west was finally nearing its end. And then Teclis abruptly ended the march by teleporting Grimgor's entire army and himself directly to Middenheim. The orcs think it was the will of the Green Gods, but in reality it was just Teclis desperately looking for more things to throw at Archaon. Incidentally, this is one of those fun end times moments where you think about it and wonder how the end times happened at all. Teclis brought Grimgor's entire army of orcs, goblins, ogres, and more directly to Middenheim. That was not a small army. With that in mind, why did he not just teleport Archaon's forces into, I don't know, an active volcano? Or the shattered remnants of Ulthuan so they all drown? Or how about take all the magic power used to cast that spell, and instead of trying to teleport people, just fire a magical Kamehameha at Archaon's face? But whatever, I'm not Teclis. I guess the only option was to teleport in the rampaging army of morons.
Oh, God. Okay. I see. Not like I was expecting anything, but that's a great point. I've definitely experienced this in quite a few different media, where, they introduce a power, and then that power could totally be used to circumvent the situation, but, they don't do it, and instead they do something else because it's more convenient to the writers that way. When in reality, those characters would likely not even think of doing that, or, have chosen a different option that was much better. I guess that is one of the pitfalls of writing, though. And let's be real, the end times shouldn't have happened in the first place anyways. At best, it could have been like a spin-off if they really wanted to make it into a different series.
For Grimgor's part, he was teleported close to the Incarnates themselves, and not really caring about saving the world, just started swinging. He probably would have taken down a couple of the Incarnates with him, were it not for Malekith showing that while he may be the mama's boy to end all mama's boys, he's pretty clever. He told Grimgor that in no uncertain terms was he da best, but that Archaon Git said that he was da bestest instead, and Grimgor should go and show him what's what. I'm not making that up. Paraphrased a bit, sure, but Malekith talked to Grimgor like he was an orc and pointed him towards Archaon. And honestly, this is one of the few end time bits I wish we got to see more of. It's honestly a little shocking we don't see more of that in any Warhammer setting. It sounds like a pretty surefire way to deal with any orcs you encounter. Though to be fair, it does rely on both the orcs being willing to listen to you and you not caring about anything in whatever direction you pointed them towards.
But I think that, that was actually pretty good. That was pretty funny. And it makes sense for their particular lore that, he said he was better than me? I'll go beat him up without question. Like, what else are you going to use the orcs for during the end times, right?
Grimgor now as convinced as he needed to be, he and his boys rage against the Chaos Tide. The Immortals went forth and slew thousands, and Skarsnik led the army against the forces of Chaos. Grimgor had his own task, though, and he'd see it done, no matter how many Chaos Marauders, Knights, or demons he had to kill on the way to Archaon. And it was a lot, but Grimgor managed to reach his way to Archaon more or less unscathed, and once more did the Avatar of the Green Gods fight against the Ever-Chosen. And to give Grimgor his credit, at first it was going much the same way as it did against Archaon and Storm of Chaos. He was a living green blender that Archaon just couldn't put down, and he even lost one of his greatest pieces of equipment in the process of fighting him. But Games Workshop wasn't going to let a last-minute player decision ruin it this time, and Archaon released the demon in his sword, which resulted in Grimgor getting his head taken off. Rest in peace, Grimgor Ironhide. You may have lost, but in the end, you truly were the best.
Well, at least Grimgor still lives on in Warhammer 3. That's tragic. Just getting rid of him like that. I don't know, I wouldn't even be mad if he had won it, but obviously, in Storm of Chaos, that had already happened, so...
Any reappearance in Age of Sigmar, all seems to be quiet on that front. Gordrakk seems likely to continue on being the main orc character, and for once that's a change I think is ultimately for the better. Grimgor is a living blender and the embodiment of orcs just wanting to smash, but Gordrakk has some semblance of actual character and personality. If that fills your heart with sorrow, however, rejoice, because Total Warhammer exists, so even if you can no longer champion his cause of hitting things until they stop moving on the tabletop, you can still do so here. Of course, undoubtedly, there are numerous ways you could go about acquiring an approximation of a Grimgor Ironhide model, but those ways are rather crass and uncouth. I won't show you any directly so as not to be shot by Games Workshop lawyers, but I assure you, there are ways. For now though, Total War time. Digital, do or don't Grimgor. More positive, he's the smashiest orc ever. He goes around saying he's the one true git, he's the strongest orc to ever exist, and sometimes when you click on him on the battlefield, he just starts shouting, "Say my name!" So if you're in the mood for a legendary lord that's all about smashing people to bits, he's for you. Solving your anger issues are all well and good, but it's a lot more satisfying to just beat someone to death. You could also...
I really hope that his campaign in Warhammer 3 is just, you know, battle after battle after battle, and it's fun, like how his lore is. This just really excites me to want to try out the greenskins.
A big Scar brand for this, but then I will judge you harshly. Relatedly, if you want your leader to be proper threatening, he's still the best choice for you. Any warrior who faces Grimgor promptly dies. That's the end of the matter. Rat Ogre, Dragon, champion of one race or the other, all promptly die in the face of Grimgor's fury. Undoubtedly, he has hundreds of grudges for the dwarves particularly, so if you've got a special hatred for the vertically challenged, there's no better option than Grimgor. And while this may seem a bit dismissive of the guy, I'm kinda out of lore positives for Grimgor. Now, I don't mean that in a rude way, it's just that as a lore character, he's very simple. If all you want is to have a fun time smashing stuff, you want Grimgor, but that's about all you're gonna get out of him.
That's completely
Even the
fine.
other orc characters have more going on for them, and the goblins, as ever, get a bit more characterization than their taller counterparts.
With so many different characters, you can have a wide variety of them. And no matter what, you might find something that you enjoy. And Grimgor seems like a lot of fun, but obviously if you want more nuance, look elsewhere.
But Grimgor just exists to destroy whatever's unlucky enough to be in his way today, so there's not much room for the nuances of his thought process. As for his gameplay positive those, there's naturally more to say in that department. For the campaign side of things, picking him as your starting legendary lord makes it easier to recruit Black Orc big bosses, reduces the upkeep for Black Orc and Biggin units, gives a chance for Black Orcs to spawn in any WAS you start, and gives a bonus to campaign movement range. As you can probably guess from this sort of thing, he's all about helping you get the best boys possible in your army and getting them where they need to be. His traits that buff his army specifically are similar, though not exactly extensive. He gives some buffs to Black Orc and Biggin units, but that's about it aside from the red or blue line skills everyone has. As you can probably guess, things like buffing your troops or having any semblance of leadership aren't what you want Grimgor for. No, you want Grimgor for his performance on the battlefield, and I have a very handy two-step guide for just how to use him. Step 1 is to select Grimgor and right-click an enemy unit, preferably a lord or hero because he has an ability to debuff them, but anything will do. Step 2 is to forget about him and go manage the rest of your army. With this two-step process, Grimgor will obliterate whatever you throw at him, and you can repeat the process until the
That sounds awesome. Now I can just focus on the rest of my army instead of having to worry about like a squishy lord and trying to position them correctly to make them the most effective. Seems like a pretty good transition from Gorok. I don't know, like, once we get to the greenskin factions, who I'll play first. Maybe Grimgor. Actually, which greenskin faction would you guys recommend if I ever tried them out? As, like, my first one. You guys all know the game a lot more than I do, so yeah, I'll check out the comments.
Battle is over, and his unique items, his blood-forged armor and his axe Gitsnick, only make him better at it. Now, those of you familiar with Total War may understand that for a variety of reasons, Grimgor has gained a reputation of not being the best legendary lord, especially in multiplayer. To that I have two simple counter-arguments. One, I do not care about Total War competitive multiplayer. Never have, never will, so any arguments about his viability stemming from there can go right to hell. For two, I'm not playing at Cockstomp Omega Legendary End Time Skull Blaster difficulty mode, where your unit of max experience Black Orcs get wiped by a unit of Skaven slaves. I'm here to have fun with AI modifiers for the campaign, making the play smart and get some economy.
Well, this video... Actually, no, this video is a bit more recent, wasn't it? From what Pancreas is saying, maybe the Orcs just don't have as good as an economy or, like, good units, and maybe they need a buff. But, you know, if you're just playing it for the lore and the campaign, then, like, who cares?
buffs, and their battle AI is also as smart as it can be. What I'm not a fan of is giving the AI an extra 5 billion to all of their stats. So with that in mind, Grimgor is going to butcher almost anything you throw at him. He's not the best melee legendary lord in the game, but he's damn close, and he's great at taking on both other lords and heroes and large enemy units. If you can somehow get him the Sword of Cain, then congratulations, you won the game. As for his downsides, lore-wise it's pretty much what you'd expect from someone like Grimgor. If you want someone with any amount of character depth or whatnot, then you aren't going to be finding that here. He's just here to make things dead. He has the same level of character depth as Kid Buu and only a slightly larger vocabulary. I mean, even other greenskins will have some kind of attachments, like Skarsnik and his pet Squig. He loved that thing, and it was genuinely distraught when it died in the end times. And naturally, of course, he's a bad guy, like as evil as you can get without being part of chaos. Even more than the other orcs, Grimgor loves war and tearing people apart. There's nothing even like Skarsnik's aforementioned attachment to his Squig. The only people remotely considered something akin to his friends are his immortal's bodyguard, and when he's gone a couple days without a fight, even they aren't totally safe from his wrath. So just accept that when loading up a Grimgor Ironhide campaign, you are going to make the world immeasurably worse. As for his downsides in the game, there's a few. It'd be nice if he buffs some of the greenskin's more monstrous units like the Spider or the Giant. I understand why he doesn't, and Black Orcs are quite the good infantry unit, but it'd be cool to see the real heavy hitters get some spotlight with them. Fair's fair though, he's the embodiment of the Orcs' brutality, not the brutality of whatever weird shit they bring to a fight. Without a mount, he's also stuck foot slogging across the battlefield.
Lore-wise,
it could be worse, and sooner or later you're going to be spending a decent chunk of time fighting the Chaos Dwarfs, and they're not exactly the speediest folk on the planet, but a solid ranged army could give him a lot of trouble if they can keep away from him. Kiting Grimgor to death is always going to be his biggest weakness, at least to me, so especially watch out for the Wood Elves. He's not going to break until he has like 3 hit points left, so that's not the biggest problem, but triggering army losses on the rest of his forces is a perfectly viable way to negate Grimgor, so heads up for that strategy as well. A themed Grimgor army is either going to need some mods like I'm using to give him some additional units to play with and buff, or it's going to be gimped when your Black Orc Doomstack gets shredded by Hellstorm rocket batteries. And last gameplay con, he starts in the Mountains of Morn. And I really don't like mountainous areas in Total Warhammer.
To make sense.
You'd think narrow mountain passes would be great for choke points, but almost every army you'll fight in the mountains can just underway teleport and ruin your entire plan. Fighting dwarfs early game is also a tremendous pain in the ass, and from personal experience, that has not changed in regards to the chores. And in Total Warhammer 3, Grimgor has to deal with the ogres nearest spawn, which while they can't underway right to your capital, it does mean he has to deal with their fat asses turning his turn 1 army into paste around him. Admittedly, this is more of a greenskin problem than Grimgor specifically, and with the aforementioned mods, you can give yourself something like Orc Spearboys, but if you're the most vanilla player on the planet, it's something you'll have to deal with, at least until you can get some upgraded provinces under your belt. And that is the lore and gameplay of Grimgor Ironhide.
We'll keep that in mind.
For all the dismissiveness I might have shown towards him in some bits, I do like him a lot. While yes, he's incredibly simple, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, and it can make for some fun moments. If you have a group to play it with, maybe have a campaign session of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay involve Grimgor showing up. Sure, there's not going to be much in the way of debate or anything along those lines with him, but it could be a great time either holding him off until some ritual can be completed, desperately trying to run or hide from him, or pulling a Malekith and pointing him at something you really want gone. And as always, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You were the Gitsnick to my Grimgor, letting me severely reduce the quality of whatever Warhammer setting I'm talking about at the time. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there.
Glad to see that the list of names has increased massively over the years.
I think it would be very funny if Grimgor came back in Age of Sigmar and his only actions are to kick Archaon in the balls, point at him and laugh, then go back into the heavens to rejoin Gork and Mork or something like that. No major plot points, no actual storyline with it. He just shows back up, kicks the Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse square in the taint, and leaves. Truly showing once and for all that even though his planet exploded, he truly is the best.
Dude. Please make that happen.